With over 1,000 monsters to choose from in D&D, it can be hard to know which ones to use, and even harder to know how to play them. What weapons do they favor? What tactics would they use? How do they interact with other types of monsters? These are all questions that can come up to DMs that are looking to make their combats more enticing for their players. It's certainly one that I struggled with. That's why I'm back today with another monster breakdown for D&D. Hello again everyone, I'm Bill from AltRoll, and today I'm going to dive into a brief history of a D&D creature, how that history was adapted into 5th edition, and how this lore can help game masters make their combat encounters better. So, whether you're here for the cool lore breakdown or for the combat tactics, I'm hoping to give you a lot more to chew on when it comes to the monsters we face in D&D. For episode 10, let's look at the hungering brutes of the Underdark, Troglodytes. Troglodyte originates from the ancient Greek word Troglodyte. Literally meaning cave-goers, the word troglodyte has been used historically to refer to cavemen, prehistoric humans from the Paleolithic era. It's from this etymology that Gary Gygax took inspiration, and in 1977, the Troglodyte made its debut in the 1st edition Monster Manual. Originally described as reptilian humanoids that lived underground, Troglodytes were unabashedly evil, slaughtering everything they encountered. The only defining feature they had back then was their offensive smell, which was pungent enough to harm those around them. This oppressive smell has persisted across the various editions as a trademark of the creature, though now there's quite a bit more lore fleshing them out as more than just smelly lizards. In 5th edition, Troglodytes are violent humanoids that wage constant war against their neighbors as well as each other in the shallow waters of the Underdark. Generally smaller than the average human, their bodies are coated with grayish-brown scales, although they can change that coloration like a chameleon. Their stench is still around, and pungent enough to poison nearby creatures. They struggle to see in the light given their underground living, but have a natural dark vision that enables them to use their fangs and claws to ambush unsuspecting prey. Always seeking their next meal, Troglodytes are almost entirely devoted to seeking out food, eating anything that can fit in their stomach. The majority of a Troglodyte's time is spent hunting or raiding, seeking out new prey to drag back to their lairs. They take extra pleasure in hunting intelligent creatures, and show no mercy to those unlucky enough to be caught by them. These hunting parties will typically be led by the largest and strongest Troglodyte, and successful hunt leaders fall into the de facto role as leaders of their tribe. These leaders are not infallible though, and any sign of weakness or hesitation will get them attacked and devoured by their fellow tribe members. This essentially makes up the only guiding principle of Troglodyte society. The strong eat the weak until only the strong remain. Speaking of their society, Troglodytes are scavengers and don't really make or build anything of their own. While they might decorate the edges of their caves with cracked bones or pictographs painted in blood or dung, this is done more so to mark their territory rather than as a creative expression. Troglodytes are also likely to toss aside anything they can't eat outright, but do understand the value of metal weapons and armor, so much so that they will fight amongst themselves to have the right to equip them. Outside of scavenging and hunting, some Troglodytes worship Leogzed, the abyssal demigod of gluttony and wanton destruction. Depicted as a monstrously fat toad lizard that slumbers in the abyss, Leogzed does nothing for the Troglodytes, except give them the goal of becoming as well-fed and wearily content as he seems to be. So, to summarize their lore, Troglodytes are violent, tribal scavengers who mercilessly prowl the Underdark to attack and consume anything they can defeat. Now that we've examined their lore, let's pivot over to the Troglodytes' mechanics by looking at their stat block. This is what a Troglodyte stat block looks like. Let's break it down section by section and look at what's listed here in detail. Starting at the top, we have their size, creature type, and alignment. Size in 5th edition defines the space a creature takes up in combat, with a medium creature taking up a 5 foot by 5 foot square or hex on a battle map. Using the 3.5 edition Dungeon Master's Guide, shown here, Troglodytes can be between 4 and 8 feet tall and weigh anywhere between 60 and 500 pounds. Their creature type is humanoid, with Troglodyte in parentheses. The Troglodyte subrace has few variations, but the ones they do have are the Armored Troglodyte from Dungeon of the Mad Mage and the Troglodyte Champion from Out of the Abyss. Alignment broadly describes a creature's general outlook on the world and combines their moral beliefs with their attitudes towards society and order. The alignment of the Troglodyte is chaotic evil, meaning they act with arbitrary violence, spurred by their greed, hatred, or in the Troglodyte's case, bloodlust. Below that top bar are the rest of the Troglodyte's stats, which are essential for the mechanical play of the creature by the Dungeon Master. The Troglodyte has an armor class of 11, 2d8 plus 4 hit points, or 13 on average, and a movement speed of 30 feet. Looking at their ability scores, they have 14 strength, 10 dexterity, 14 constitution, 6 intelligence, 10 wisdom, and 6 charisma. With 10 being average for an ability score, the Troglodyte has high strength and constitution, average dexterity and wisdom, and low intelligence and charisma. For their skills and proficiencies, the Troglodyte has a +2 to stealth, has dark vision out to 60 feet, has a passive perception of 10, speaks Troglodyte, has a proficiency bonus of +2, has a challenge rating of 1/4, and awards 50 experience points when killed. In terms of special abilities, the Troglodyte has the Chameleon Skin, Stench, and Sunlight Sensitivity abilities. Chameleon Skin grants the Troglodyte advantage on stealth checks to hide. Stench states that any creature other than a Troglodyte that starts its turn within 5 feet of the Troglodyte must succeed on a DC 12 Constitution saving throw or be poisoned until the start of the creature's next turn. On a successful save, the creature is immune to the stench of all Troglodytes for 1 hour. Sunlight Sensitivity states that while in sunlight, the Troglodyte has disadvantage on attack rolls and perception checks that rely on sight. For offensive actions, the Troglodyte has a bite attack, a claw attack, and the multi-attack feature to make 1 bite and 2 claw attacks per attack action. The bite attack has a +4 to hit, a reach of 5 feet, and deals 1d4 +2 piercing damage on a hit. The claw attack has a +4 to hit, a reach of 5 feet, and deals 1d4 +2 slashing damage on a hit. Lastly, we have their environment tags. When using digital resources, we can see that Troglodytes tend to be found in the Underdark. Now that we've gone through and sorted out their stat block, we can begin to relate the Troglodytes' lore and abilities to how we should be using them in combat encounters. Specifically, we're going to look at how they behave, how they would approach a combat situation, and how to get into the mind of a Troglodyte if you want to fight effectively as one. How do we do this? Well, we'll need to take the lore and stat block of the monster and compare that with how that information is intended, referencing tactics and interpretations from The Monsters Know What They're Doing by Keith Amon. Let's start by going through Amon's key assumptions one by one and relating them to the troglodyte as we go. The first of Amon's assumptions is that most creatures want to survive, and if seriously wounded, will try to flee combat. Exceptions to this rule are fanatics or intelligent beings who believe they'll be hunted down and killed if they do flee. Now, seriously wounded can be subjective, but we can assume that threshold to roughly be 1/3 of a creature's health. With an average of 13 hit points, 1/3 of that would be rounded to 4. So, it's safe to assume that if a troglodyte were reduced to 4 hit points or fewer, it would begin to flee combat. Next up, let's look at how their alignment can impact their thinking. On the scale of good to evil, good creatures tend to be friendly to others, whereas evil creatures are hostile to others. On the scale of lawful to chaotic, lawful monsters may try to capture or non-lethally subdue others, whereas chaotic monsters may kill them. Since troglodytes are chaotic evil, we know 2 things about them. First, since they're chaotic, troglodytes will try to kill and eat their opponents, though their lore also implies they'd be willing to capture a target to eat them later. Secondly, since they're evil creatures, troglodytes are outwardly hostile to other creatures. Continuing with their mindset, let's dive into some of their mental ability scores. Troglodytes have an intelligence score of 6. With regards to intelligence scores of 7 or less, Amon states, a creature with intelligence of 7 or less operates purely from instinct. That doesn't mean it uses its features ineffectively, only that it has one preferred modus operandi and isn't going to be able to adjust if it stops working. So this means that their preferred method of attack will be what troglodytes always try to do. And should that fail, they'll probably give up on trying to use tactics and just engage in open combat. Troglodytes also have a wisdom score of 10. With regards to wisdom scores between 8 and 11, Amon states, a creature with wisdom of 8 to 11 knows when to flee, but is indiscriminate in choosing targets. This means that troglodytes will seek out easy or opportunistic targets, and once their target begins fighting back, maybe taking a couple troglodytes down, they're likely to begin fleeing combat and moving on to easier prey. Now that we've set up how they think, let's look at the troglodytes' physical abilities that influence how they fight. Thinking like Amon, we can assume the following. Creatures with high strength focus on melee combat and won't need to compensate with greater numbers. As such, they won't need to outnumber an enemy to be willing to take a fight. Creatures with average dexterity, whatever their strength or constitution, will need to choose their battles carefully. Since their ability to avoid damage is poor, they'll want some other type of advantage. Creatures with high constitution typically have a hit point advantage over their enemies, and because of that, they're less likely to hide in combat since they can afford to soak up a couple attacks before going down. To recap our earlier stat block examination, troglodytes have high strength, average dexterity, and high constitution. Comparing this to the assumptions we put forward, troglodytes are brutes that will welcome a close-quarters slugfest once initiative is rolled. The last major premise from Amon is that in D&D 5th edition, unless otherwise specified, any creature gets their full movement, 1 action, 1 bonus action, and 1 reaction, just like any player character does. Amon posits that any creature that exists within the game world will have evolved in accordance with this rule, and it will seek to obtain the best possible result from the action economy of the game. This means they will combine whatever movement, actions, bonus actions, and reactions are available to it for the best possible outcome. For Troglodytes, this means they will attempt to combine the effects from their special abilities with their offensive features to try and survive in combat long enough to take down their opponent. The Stench ability is a passive aura that has a chance to poison enemies within melee range, which inflicts disadvantage on attack rolls that creature makes. Given the Troglodyte's armor class of 11 and relatively low hit point pool, they'll have to rely on inflicting this condition in order to survive more than a round or two in combat. This ability works in tandem with their multi-attack feature, which grants them an immense 3 attacks per turn. While these attacks only do 4 damage on average, each attack made has a chance to critically strike. Against multiple Troglodytes, some lucky rolls could make combat against them go very, very badly for the party. With these aspects in mind, in order for a Troglodyte to do as much damage as possible per turn, they would have to dash into melee as quickly as possible to inflict poison onto their enemies and hopefully survive their initial attacks. Those that do survive would then begin unleashing large amounts of melee damage to burst down their opponents until they're dead. So, with all of these assumptions laid out and applied to Troglodytes, what do we now know about how to use them in combat? First, Troglodytes gather in small hunting parties to ambush targets before rushing into melee to overwhelm them with a flurry of attacks. With their unique abilities and ability score setup, Troglodytes will be most comfortable blending into their surroundings with their chameleon skin and then swarming their foes all at once in a sudden ambush. Second, Troglodytes will choose targets indiscriminately, but won't be able to tell when their strategy isn't working, leading them to fight based on instinct and emotion rather than tactics. This makes Troglodytes relatively easy to rout, and a smart adventuring party can use strategy and cunning to full advantage against these monsters. Third, Troglodytes will use their full movement to get within melee range of their targets and unleash their multi-attacks. With their low armor class, Troglodyte survivability relies on inflicting the poisoned condition onto their enemies, as that makes attacks against them roll at disadvantage. This can only proc if their enemies are close to the Troglodyte though, thus why they're likely to rush into melee combat as soon as possible. Fourth, if reduced to 4 hit points or fewer, reduced to half their starting number, or if their leader is killed, a Troglodyte or group of Troglodytes will begin to flee combat. Given their tendency to kill and devour the weak within the tribe, it also makes sense for them to fight to the bitter end. So ultimately, this is going to come down to DM preference. Finally, if Troglodytes win a combat encounter, they're likely to kill and eat their defeated foes. As stated earlier, their lore does also indicate that they might capture foes to be eaten later within their lair. So again, this is going to come down to DM preference. And with those 5 points laid out, we come to the end of today's video on the Troglodyte. Yet another monster that doesn't get enough love in 5th edition. I think the Troglodyte could really use some more content surrounding them, whether that be through more variations of the Troglodyte to flesh out their tribal system, or a wider array of locations to encounter them outside of the Underdark. I know personally, I reflavored them in my homebrew setting to live in overworld swamps alongside bullywugs, causing conflict between the two races that allows my players to choose one side to support. However, I want to know, what do you think of the Troglodyte? You can let me know in the comments down below, or you can join the Alt-Roll Discord using the link in the description to discuss it there. While on the server, you can pop into our courses that teach the basics of D&D. And if you like what we do, supporting us on our Ko-fi goes a long way in helping us keep Alt-Roll going. That's all I had for you today though. So thank you all for watching, make sure to have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all of you next time.